Hello everyone, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who subscribed since the last episode. After the interview with Van Man, we almost doubled the size of this channel, which is phenomenal news. Since you're new though, you might not be aware that this interview is actually a follow-up to a previous chat that I had with a guy called Ahmed Al-Wari. Ahmed was looking at how companies like Amazon and Google are complicit in spreading far-right information online. That's a great interview, so if you enjoyed this one, then please go back and check that one out. I'll put the link in the description below. This week though, I'm talking to Carmen Celestini, a lecturer and researcher in the field of conspiracy theories. We start out by talking about the Queen of Canada, who is an absolutely fascinating figure if you've not heard about her already. I thought it was an absolutely great conversation, so I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. So without further ado, one more big thank you to all of you for being here, and let's roll the tape.
There is a new queen.
They came to the police station looking for what they say is justice.
The rise of the fringe QAnon leader has now sparked concerns, especially as trust erodes in the country's civic institutions. For her followers, Romana Didulo is everything. They do what she says. They preach what she asks them to do.
It's religion, it's end times, it's hope.
My fellow Canadians,
Conspiracy theories are the tool to spread populist ideas.
I address you today
We see teachers being harmed, students being harmed, people in the community being harmed.
as your queen.
It behooves us as humans to protect everyone.
My name, you can get it through Romana, who's the commander-in-chief. I'll be reporting.
The Queen is a really interesting concept. So she became somewhat of an influencer during QAnon. And she ended up sort of taking a veer, as many conspiracy theorists do. And she's linked to, and I'm just doing research on this now, so it's not completely filled out, but she's linked to a religion called the I Am movement, which was started in the 1940s. And she sort of has built that. And so we can see in a lot of conspiracy theories that there's intertwining of religion, conspiracy theories, and politics all together.
So
and so
I
she's
am,
managed to
sorry, I am,
the I
does that stand for something?
movement. No, it's so the thing is that it's based on this theory that originally this individual had a moment, an interaction with Saint Germain on Mount Shasta. And what the theory in the nutshell is that there are certain prophets who come to the world from another plane and try to put humans back on the right path. And so Saint Germain said that some of the prophets were like George Washington, obviously Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha. So these individuals come for a short time and try to help us. And so what people do in the I Am movement is they concentrate on a certain object. So for Saint Germain, who is the main component of this religion, it's the color purple. And so they concentrate on the color purple, and they have things called decrees, which are sort of like motivational speeches, like little tiny things that motivate you and like encourage you to do things. And they would chant these decrees while concentrating on the color purple. And it potentially doing this brings you to new levels of vibrational dimensions that will bring you closer to the gods and to the prophets. And eventually you yourself will sort of like in a moment of enlightenment, move on. So it sort of links the ideas of Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism all together in this one religion. And the religion sort of split up when the original prophet died. It split up, and so smaller churches came. And so one of the women that took over the movement was this woman named Claire Prophet. And Claire Prophet started changing the decrees from just being motivational, get your vibrations going kind of thing, to actual attacks on the government, like on Eisenhower, and insisting that, that the world has to change politically more towards her movement. Now, because the movement consistently believed that George Washington was one of the prophets, there's a strong conservative sort of right-wing idea that's attached to this. And so Claire Prophet ended up buying this huge hunk of land in Montana and built bunkers and tunnels underneath this land because she was convinced there was going to be nuclear war. So she said it was going to happen on a certain date, and all of her adherents came to Montana and locked themselves underneath these tunnels. So it's kind of like that television show that Tina Fey did, because obviously nothing happened and people came out, and it sort of blew up at that point, to use another, inappropriate term considering I was talking nuclear war.
Yeah.
But there are still 300 churches around North America
I
that
can't believe I've not
believe.
heard of this before.
The Queen herself has said that she is a prophet within this movement. And, for conspiracy theories like this to take hold, there has to be radical politics and occultism and, new age occult ideas and mixed with heterodox religion and, chaos happening in the world, which we have all of that happening, right? So the Queen has managed to take many of these things from, a very under-researched religion called I Am and build a movement herself. And so she has declared herself the Queen of Canada. She sends out decrees, which are both motivational constantly on her Telegram channels, but also decrees like Claire Prophet did, demanding things of the government and of society. She linked herself to, saying that she's the US military has supported her, that she's going to organize between Ukraine and Russia and, try to negotiate these things. The Queen has put out, she's sort of not just QAnon, right? So the QAnon conspiracy theory is sort of like what we call improvisational conspiracism, right? It's a super conspiracy because it links different conspiracy theories together in a hierarchical kind of framework, right? So the Queen, while promoting many of the ideas within QAnon, like, the deep state, blood drinking demons being in charge of the government, it also links into the Great Reset. And it also links into conspiracy theories known as GESARA and NISARA. And with GESARA and NISARA, all of humanity's debts are going to be erased, right? So we won't own money. So it's somewhat linked to the Great Reset, where we won't own anything and we'll be happy, right? So we won't have to pay our mortgages or any of those kind of things, credit card bills. It's quite.
So they see that as a positive thing.
They see that part as a positive thing because, it's sort of interpreted in two ways. So in one way, it's sort of like, the people of the world rising up and no longer being under the constraints of society's bills and society's demands. And we can actually work to be a better humanity. On the other side, they say that it can also be used by the Great Reset to take away, they'll reward us with this, but in fact, we lose everything and become slaves to this new world order. So she has sort of walked that thin line between the two and told her members or adherents not to pay their electrical bills or not to pay their rent or their mortgage. And a lot of her members are actually living in cars or they're living in the darkness with no heat. And so, it really works with ideas of apocalyptic thought, that even though this date or these things keep happening, they still have faith in the fact when it doesn't happen, right? Yeah. So she is able to create this realm where, it's religion, it's end times, it's hope, it's, the 1,000 years of peace when she takes over. And she has almost put herself in this position of being a saint in a way, because her members will pray to her and say, during COVID, we don't have food or we don't have farm feed. And she created this network across Canada that allowed people to create food banks for the adherents to her, and even discounted food for their farms and, things that they needed. So, they pray to her almost that she can solve their problems. And so it's crossed this realm of just simply political to also religious. And, there has been reports that a lot of people think that, she's going to rise up and, cause violence and things like that. And I'm sure you've heard that some of her members tried to arrest police officers.
Yeah, that's what I read.
But
it's not going to end well, I don't think.
Well, I mean, they got arrested. The police were pretty okay, you guys are, we'll just put you in this jail cell. But the interesting thing is that there's a lot of rhetoric now in the media about the violence that, her and her adherents could have, that she had, threatened some of the people who are no longer in her inner circle by throwing them out of a helicopter or shooting them. But what we're seeing is the media aren't asking about, is she actually armed? I mean, she has her membership paying for the RV that she's using to travel around Canada right now. So I don't think she actually has a helicopter that she could push people out of, right? And when we saw them talking about going to arrest police officers, they were all saying, maybe we should go arrest academics or health workers instead, because they're not armed. So they realize and acknowledge their lack of military training or their lack of, having arms in any way. So I think we have to be careful, even when we're talking about this, about creating a moral panic of sorts, worrying about, her and her adherents' violence, rather than the fact that, there's a lot of self-harm that is happening within this
Does
movement.
it, I mean, as an academic, does it worry, working in this field specifically, does it worry you? I mean, it sounds like you're more worried about them, but do you worry about your own personal safety?
Sometimes. I mean, I often get death threats and often, be called a traitor to Canada and traitor to, humanity. And, sometimes when I post articles up, I get a lot of very negative, misogynistic attacks about myself.
Yeah.
But I also feel that there's a lot of keyboard warriors, and I'm not particularly concerned that they're going to come after me. I think that, they're articulating their own fears and articulating their empowerment as a social hero in this movement. But I mean, sometimes some of the threats are a little, make you catch your breath a little
Yeah.
bit. But I don't think, hopefully, nothing on wood, anything will happen to me.
So you said this was born out of the QAnon movement.
Mhm.
Do you think that, well, during the period where, say, Donald Trump's influence has declined, not being the president anymore, do you think that other figures will arise, for example, like, the Queen, to fill that void?
Well, I think that what we need to think about is how the internet is, right? So it's borderless. So we see where you and I would see that there's a definitive line between American politics and Canadian politics and nationality and traditions and culture. Online, that doesn't exist, right? We have communities coming together internationally to have these conversations. There is a significant number of QAnon believers who still believe Donald Trump is going to come back to power. There's numerous
Which
theories
isn't that
about
unreasonable, at least that
exactly.
part.
Well, we'll see what happens. It depends on what happens with the DOJ, actually. But
Well, yeah.
we see that much like millennial thought or about apocalyptic thought, that there's still this continuous hope that it's going to happen. And with him sort of promoting QAnon much more so than he used to, like using their theme song, and his at his rallies, people holding up the one finger and doing all of these symbols, they actually believe that this investigation of the documents that were at Mar-a-Lago and all those kind of things are really attacks on him that are leading to the deep state to take over and the military to take over. So there's a lot of hope attached to that. We see that there's picking and choosing on who are the political leaders and who are the political enemies and those kind of things. Much of QAnon is linked to Putin and Trump's relationship. So they actually believe that Ukraine is full of Nazis and that Putin is saving the world through his actions and his connections to Donald Trump. So, that kind of political thing is going to go away. And, for conspiracy theories to exist, there has to be distrust in the institutions of society. And, even if tomorrow Donald Trump goes to jail, there will be a new sort of narrative or trope that's developed around why this is happening and how it can still work. And, that distrust isn't going to just end, it's not
So,
just going to go poof.
yeah, sure. So how good or bad do you think media understanding of these things is one of the things that I read a lot at the time was that, the rise of populist or, further right wing governments, movements in the UK and in the US, like, drove these things. But obviously, if you take a look at Canada, I don't think you could describe Trudeau as like a populist, right?
No, but our
Rather,
political parties, others are, right? So we have Pierre Poilievre, who's absolutely a populist. We have Maxime Bernier, who's absolutely a populist. And they both use a rhetoric of conspiracy theories and nationalism and these type of movements in their base to get political power. I mean, just as we see everywhere else. Yeah, definitely Justin Trudeau is not a populist leader, but your question about media, it is an important aspect to this because, for years, we've dismissed people who have conspiratorial ideals, right? We picture them wearing tinfoil hats and we mock them, they're, someone in their mom's basement who's, 50 years old, never had a girlfriend and sort of typing down there, being a keyboard warrior. But the fact is that, conspiracy theories do play a role in politics and movements and society. So underneath every conspiracy theory is an articulation of injustice, whether it's real or it's just a perceived injustice, and is a way of articulating that. And we need to address those injustices, whatever they may be. If I look at conspiracy theories from the 1950s or even the start of the Illuminati in 1776, we see a pattern of eruption, right? It's the exact same sort of culture war issues, the exact same types of fears, communism, and the great replacement of, white individuals. We see these women's rights, LGBTQ rights, all of these culture war issues continuously erupt. And, we don't respond to it when it sort of goes down, and we don't interact with transparency or try to build trust in our institutions again. We just think, they're gone. But that's not the truth, And so where we are right now, some of the QAnon, we can put a little bit of blame on the media because, when we look at what was happening with social media, where it was really existing during COVID, we saw them talking about what was happening, and then, how Donald Trump or other people were shadow banned on Twitter, and that people were moving to Parler or Parlay, whichever way you want to articulate it, depending if you're French Canadian or American. So people started looking at what Parler was, right? They were interested, they were curious. And if they had been involved with some of the people who were claiming shadow banning, they would move over to Parler. And, Parler was more of a Wild West kind of thing, right? There wasn't as much moderation, very low moderation. And so the conversations became more intense and more blatant, where, perhaps on Twitter, it was a meme about anti-immigration. On Parler, it was far more xenophobic or racist. And then when Parler was taken down, they were talking, oh, this is happening with Amazon, this is happening with Google. All of those people moved over to Telegram. So now you have people who might have been on the periphery of knowledge or curiosity, had developed relationships on Parler and moved to Telegram, which is absolutely the Wild West. And so they were introduced to far more intense ideas that, in intense communities. And so, where we saw the media saying, we need sympathy towards the Donald Trump supporters, or even when they were doing the whole alt-right thing where they were showing, the clean-cut white guy leading, there was a connection that people could make to that. And it was more of, here is a movement, here is people articulating what they believe without really thinking about the negativity that could cause, right? I mean, especially during COVID, when we were locked in our houses, this was it. This is how we engaged. And it was 24 hours a day when we wanted to have a conversation online. And, we all were curious and bored. And we ended up going in these different directions. And there is sympathies that were developed or connections that may never have been made before.
I think a lot of people have anecdotal experience of someone that they know who's kind of gone down the rabbit hole to various extents. And that might be, QAnon stuff, but there's also the whole manosphere stuff is another example of that. And I'm sure there's loads more that we're probably unaware of.
Thousands of them.
I think that's really interesting how the pandemic kind of fed into that. But just to go back a little bit, how do you feel? Because in a way, that's some argument against, say, banning some of these extreme peoples from the public space. Where do you sit on that debate between, we should ban people who produce harmful speech versus we should just let them go because it's better that we have this conversation in public as opposed to in private?
Well, I think that there's a line there, right? So, as I said earlier, the internet is borderless, right? So Canada can't just make a decision and say, this is what we're going to do. I mean, as a prime example, so Proud Boys are a terrorist organization here. So we can't access any of their information online. I press a button on my VPN, I can get all of the Proud Boy information, right? I don't even have to work hard at it. And you don't have to be a technical genius. And if we say in Canada, our hate speech laws say these things are not acceptable on social media. And our laws say our community will not accept this and it cannot be there. There's no way to stop people from going to that, right? And for social media, Denmark might have one law, America has another, and they have to accommodate these things. But with VPN technology, we can access everything.
Right.
So the response can't be one individual country. It has to be a global response to disinformation and to some of this hate speech that is online, because there's so many ways around that. So first of all, we have to have that global response and an understanding of what we as humanity, not as a nation or a society, accept and will not accept. And that works with free speech ideas and First Amendment ideas and all of the free speech laws in all of the countries. Secondary, we have to think about social media as well. They have to take a responsibility. So if we think about YouTube, individuals like Gavin McInnes or Stefan Mallieu or Alex Jones, they have been very performative in saying we ban these individuals, but they didn't ban their podcasts. So I can still look up every single one of their podcasts and get that live on YouTube. Also didn't ban other people from putting those things up. So if I was a fan, I could record it and put it up on my channel. So there's no, there's a performative notion that these people are not good for society, so we won't allow them there, but they haven't blocked the message, which is the far more powerful tool for these individuals. And so it has to be a combination where, we just don't say we've done X and then still let everything still exist. There has to be some type of ramifications for that as well. We have to think about notions of, like with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, everyone's like, oh, now all the right-wing people are going to come and the white nationalists and all this stuff. They never left. Many of the people who said, I quit Twitter, they're shadow banning me, and went to BitChute and went to Gab and went to all the other places, still have a Twitter channel.
Oh, for sure.
I follow numerous white nationalist groups on Twitter. They're not hidden. And so we have to decide as a humanity what it is acceptable or not. I think there is a difference between hate speech and disinformation and conspiracy theories. There's a very, eventually, they meld together. People will make that connection. But, the disinformation that we see on Twitter, which is linked to hate speech or conspiracy theories on other social media, is sort of like, reefer madness. It's sort of the gateway into these kind of things, So we have to, as humanity, come together to decide this. And
when you say humanity, just to pick you up on that, it sounds a bit idealistic to me, because I think the idea of free speech in, say, the US is going to be very different from the standards that you would expect from, say, like, China. So when you say like what we decide as humanity, I mean, presumably what in the case of the internet, you're talking about just, places that don't have these great firewalls, right? Or are you including, everyone in this? Like.
Well, I think that we have to include everyone, because, disinformation and conspiracy theories aren't just something that your aunt and uncle are falling for in this rabbit hole. They're also tools of propaganda, right? We see what Russia's doing. We see what China can do. We can see what, countries can do to hurt the politics of other countries, or even to create mobilizations or movements. And so, when the internet started, everyone thought this is going to be utopian, right? We're all going to come together and everyone will have information and communities will grow and it'll be for the betterment of humanity. And, our detriment is that we don't ever consider the dark side until it comes up and sort of slaps us in the face and goes, ha. And so I think that, although idyllic to say that humanity needs to do this, I think there has to be a concerted effort by all of the governments to come together, not just to look at espionage or, attacks on the internet, but to deal with this information. And, the populism that is arising from these movements, conspiracy theories are a mechanism and a tool to spread populist ideas. And, they hurt marginalized communities when they take power. And,
Sure.
And we have to, it behooves us as humans to protect everyone, especially the vulnerable. And, we won't be able to do that, the snap of a finger. It may take years to do that, but I think it is a goal that we need to work towards, and at least acknowledge that we have to do this as a planet. And we have to look at, media literacy for adults. Like, I teach conspiracy theories information. And, libraries are putting out information for schools and for universities, but there is a at a very technical, ginormous, normal amount of people who aren't within those realms, that don't understand the impact of the memes that they're sharing,
Yeah,
or the impact of what they're following online, or what's real or what's not. And it has to be a concerted effort for us to teach that type of literacy, and not just put together a little package and say, go online and take this course,
sure.
because technology changes every 5 minutes, right? It has to be something that is continuous.
And I mean, I think that's a much more feasible goal. I guess my worry is that when one of the chief sources of misinformation are like state level actors, I can't imagine a global response.
We can't. That's true. But I mean, if we think about China or Russia or North Korea, or countries that have these firewalls that block these things, most of the disinformation that's happening is propaganda created by the governments, right? And but I think for the democratic countries out there, that we need to come together. And an example is, and I use this often, is the convoys that happened here in Canada, right? The convoys here became the apex of a movement against this new world order and the Great Reset and mandates and all of the conspiracy theories, to the point that they actually believed that if Canada, New Zealand, and Australia fell, that would be the start of the new world order, right? So protests similar to Canadians' protests in Ottawa, in New Zealand and Australia, were carrying the Canadian flag because they were heroes for fighting against this new world order. And so I did interviews in New Zealand and Australia where they were like, what the heck? How did this get? Why are there Canadian flags there? Because we're so far apart, and, how is that connection happening? But that's what we have to address as society, is that, even here with the farmer protests, we have tractor trailers trying to get out to go protest the same idea. They made up this idea that Justin Trudeau was going to end fertilizer and end all of these things and create this shortage of food. And so that movement started going because it happened over there and it was on the internet, and people started believing that this was a world order. So to presume that, Justin Trudeau should not be talking to the Prime Minister of Australia and New Zealand, or working with Joe Biden, or working with the EU, is ridiculousness. We have to engage as the G7 or as the UN. We need to come together, even though the UN is, in their minds, the ultimate conspiracy theory. But we have to address this not as individual nations, and because there are no individual nations on the even our convoy person, one of the people who led it, Tamara Litch, her husband was, trying to be the person that would help get her out on bail and be responsible for her. And they were asking him questions, and he was like, that's against my First Amendment rights. Well, we don't have First Amendment rights in Canada, right? And so, it's such a blurring, and we laugh at it, but in their minds, that this is something that, is their right, their God-given right to have these things. So we can't have our response not acknowledge this type of situation.
So the biggest argument, or the most common argument that I see against a legal response, I guess, is this kind of free speech absolutist position. For the record, I don't think it really holds that much weight, but firstly, what would you say about that? And then just as a follow-up question before I forget it, I think if you want to make laws about it, I think a more convincing way to do it is if you can prove or somehow quantify the damage that is caused by misinformation, because then you can hold platforms or even individuals responsible for those damages. Is there a way to accurately predict that?
Well, okay. So first of all, with the First Amendment, I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer from any country. So I think that our response has to include researchers. It has to include academics, lawyers, people who understand this from all of the ways that we need to address this, political scientists. We need to
ethicists, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. We need to have a community response of experts from all different levels to address this. The constitutional laws here are different than constitutional laws where you are, so we need to take all of those things into consideration when we're responding to this. It can't just be the government going, aha, this is our law, dictatorship, and boom. It really has to be a community effort from experts from many fields. As for predicting the impact of this, I think that researchers are definitely doing that. I mean, we all are taking down the data, downloading it, and looking at the timelines of things that are actually occurring, right? So we can see where there is a connection to populism, to conspiracy theories, to right-wing extremism. So an example is here, we have the People's Party of Canada. And during our last federal election, many of the people who were running for that party ran on conspiracy theories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they ran about the Agenda 21, about the Great Reset, the New World Order, that Justin Trudeau was part of the World Economic Forum and was definitely the puppet. And, people, with the chaos that COVID created, anti-mandate people were engaged with the People's Party of Canada, who are very much anti-immigration. Do not think that we should have LGBTQ laws. They're connected to anti-CRT, anti-groomer moral panic that's happening in our schools. And, that populism, they didn't talk on, well, I mean, they tweeted, they did those things, but they went on BitChute and they went to the social media platforms where that base was and did interviews. They were very linked to a lot of the religious leaders who were part of this conspiratorial idea. And, they promoted themselves there, where, mainstream people were sort of dismissing this because they weren't really around. And that had an impact. And we can see where that impact is. We saw them going to the convoys. We saw them doing all these things. And so you can actually sort of measure how some of that grew and how their influence was a part of, this idea of persecution and prosecution of religion in Canada. And so we can see the same thing with what happened on January 6th, right? Online. We can see the steps and the ideas and the articulations. So we can see what harms can happen. And, we just need to have that be taken seriously. I think that, people still mock conspiracy theories and mock the Queen and mock, this idea of the World Economic Forum, but it is having a huge impact politically on society. We see with the groomer moral panic, teachers being harmed, students being harmed, people in the community being harmed, and while we laugh and say, oh, I can't believe they do this, school boards are being taken over, and that is impacting children. So, we have to stop our mockery and now people still will mock it, but I think people now see conspiracy theories. When I was a kid, conspiracy theories were this thing that was kind of dumb and, interesting to read about, But I think now more and more people realize that the dangers of it, partially because of stuff like QAnon, and obviously the anti-vax movement. But no, you disagree? I disagree. I mean, I teach a lot of conspiracy theories to students, and a lot of them are not aware. They might have certain ideas about the things that are happening. And I think for adults, we still see, even if you just open Twitter right now and type in, you can't use the letter Q, but you put in CUE, non, and you see people making jokes about it, right? We see people still mocking Lauren Barbara or Marjorie Taylor Greene. We see this mockery of who they are, but they're not taking into consideration the problem. And part of that is there is a divide in society right now, right? So if we look at the left, and not just extreme left, but even marginal left and marginal right, or conservative and far right, all parties are saying don't talk to the other side, because they're spreading the good news, and they're not going to listen to you, and they're just going to mock you, and there can be no change. We can't solve this problem if we don't have conversations, right? We need to talk to the people who are on the left before they go to the absolute extreme left, right? We need to talk to the people on the right before they go to the extreme right. And because, and it's not just the adherents saying this, we can look at academic books that are talking about, systemic racism or racism in society, or even there's a book from, I believe, a Harvard author about woke religion. Scholars are saying don't talk to the other side. And that is making this much worse, right? We're creating enclaves of people where we designate who are the enemy and who is a true nationalist or who is the true believer in helping society. And without that conversation between the moderates in the middle, we're not going to progress, right? This is just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Do you think? Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that conversation needs to be like inherently needs to be public? Most of the criticism that I see about this kind of stuff is, the debate around platforming, or, about maybe people engaging with debates when they're not fully, educated on the subject, and, coming off badly, things like this. Or as well, even, mainstream media, like presenting like both sidesism. I'm sure there's a better word for it than that, but you know what I mean.
That's actually the word for it.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
I mean,
but
it really is.
do you think it needs to be a public conversation, or is a private, is doing that in private and in your personal lives enough?
Both, absolutely. I think that, we all have that relative or friend, as you were saying earlier, that has gone down this rabbit hole, and we instantaneously just, shun them, for a better term, and don't engage with them anymore. But, we forget, we see that person as an image of a stereotype, right? We profile them. We instantaneously go, oh, you're a racist, or, you hate women and you're a misogynist, or, we put all of these titles on it, but we forget that that person is human, and that person was somebody who shared emotions with us, someone who shared interests with us. And we only see them sort of as this, image. And on both sides, I'm not saying one side does that, both sides do it, absolutely. But, one of the things that people get involved in conspiracy theories or these movements is 100% fear-based, right? So they're afraid of something. They're afraid of losing power. They're afraid of loneliness. They're afraid of losing their jobs during COVID and not being able to feed their families. And when there is perpetual disaster, one right after the other, you look for an answer why that's happening. And, if you're religious, you can turn to whatever your deity may be. But when that prayer or the answer doesn't come, it has to be human made. And this is where conspiracy theories and, populism can come in. They amplify these fears and amplify these problems, and then provide a solution to it, or a rationale why it's happening. And, they become focused on that. But what we need to do, much like, when you watch those intervention shows, is, let's not have an argument about peer-to-peer reviewed papers, or, which newspaper is right, or who's the worst media. Have a conversation as human beings. That definitely has to happen, where I could, if you were a conspiracy theorist, say, I'm really scared that I'm not going to be able to be a professor because there's a tax on universities, or that I'm getting death threats and could die, and I don't know how to deal with it. And then have that conversation rather than try to have a battle of wits. And on a more public area, we see that, this is my unpopular opinion, so you might want to clap. But, we see that, for the longest time, left-wing people have been anti-bullying, trying to be inclusive and having all of these things. But now for the smallest infraction, or for the smallest anything, there is a glomming on of bullying to individuals, where, my students have actually said in class that they don't want to talk on social media because they're afraid 5 years from now, what they said is not going to be acceptable, and they're going to lose their livelihood or lose whatever, right? So, and, we see the right wing doing the same thing. We see this attack, right, with libs of TikTok versus chuds of TikTok. We see this constant battle between the two. And, we need our leaders in society to act like leaders. We need to stop the name calling in politics. We need to stop the, ridiculousness and, amplification of these fears, because all it does is help populism rise. And, we have to be the grown-ups in the room and actually take responsibility for what we've all created in society, and be the leaders that people need, not name calling children in the sandboxes. There was always this sort of crossing sides to have, people come together to solve problems. We don't have that anymore. No matter what that problem is, it is articulated or interpreted in the wrong way. And so that is just going to sort of bring us continuously backwards, right? So it's a two-pronged approach. I don't think that, we can just blame one group. It's all of us. So
Yeah. How do you think there's a way to do that without when the alternative approach of attacking people is so apparently effective at pushing those ideas? I mean, how can we combat that?
that's a tough thing. I think that, we have to take some time to evaluate ourselves, and this is on so many levels about how we understand this. I talk about this in Canada all the time, that 2 years ago on Canada Day, we had found so many graves from Indigenous children that had been at the schools, and we were trying to take stock of our history and what we had done as a people, and there was a call to not celebrate Canada Day and actually listen to the Indigenous voices and engage with that. The following year, because we had had the convoys and the flags were upside down, and there was so much nationalism that was attached to this, the Canadians were talking about, well, we don't want to fly the Canadian flag because we don't want to be associated with those convoys. But what that had done was silenced Indigenous voices that needed to have a conversation with Canada. And it has become predominantly a white male, grievance kind of thing now that we're all dealing with. And we haven't dealt with the pain that we have created in Canada. And I think that, that is the epitome of what this problem is, right? We see this sense of victimhood on so many different levels, and everybody is mad at everybody and everybody wants to be included. And I think that we need to take stock of, rather than being divisive and attacking each other, try to figure out how to be more inclusive and maybe not take the power of victimhood as defining us. We see that on all sides of the political spectrum, and it creates this thing that's called a social hero. And social heroes believe that they're saving the world, they're saving their nation. And as a part of that, because they know the truth, or they know, how to do this, or, whatever side we want to be on in this, that they will be castigated, they will be marginalized, they will be attacked. And when we do that, we validate them.
Yeah.
So we do that on
It's a
all sides of the
martyrdom.
political
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah. And so, we've taken so much of this notion of I'm a victim and a hero at the same time, that everyone is at fault for everything, but we're not having conversations. We're just attacking each other. So someone who, if we're trying to solve a problem, like, I'm going to be all contentious, but abortion, if we want to have a conversation about abortion, somebody who we may claim to be our enemy may be our ally in that fight, right? So we can't castigate these individuals because it's one battle at a time, right? And we may be on different sides of different options, but we're still allies in other ways, and we can't burn those bridges. And we've burned so many bridges on all sides of this, and we're all so angry that we're not having conversations, and that is our detriment.